guys, welcome to week 12 Hard Questions. I hope you've been enjoying your reading, and I want to thank you very much for sticking with me through the last several weeks, because I know that the videos have gotten long, and that's just because Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy will do that to a person. So I'm hoping you've had fun. I hope this has been helpful to you, and let's go ahead and tackle some things from this week's reading. So first, in Deuteronomy 31:14 and following, God starts talking about how Israel is in fact not going to keep his law. They're going to turn against him. They're going to be totally rebellious toward him, and he's going to have to throw them out of their own country. So a question that I would just thought to ask here is, why would God predict Israel's corruption and turning away from him? And then a corollary would be, why does he stick with these people? Why did he choose them in the first place if he knows that they're going to be so faithless? Well, for the first part, he says that they're going to be unfaithful. Why? Because they will be. And this is to give them an understanding of God knew this about you before you ever existed, that you were going to be unfaithful to him, you were going to turn away. But even in the middle of that, he was making a way for you to be redeemed and for you to be restored to your land. And so what he's doing is he's giving them hope, the same way that he gave them hope back in Genesis 15, where he said that you guys are going to end up for 400 years in oppression, and after that you're going to come out. So this is giving them hope. It's the bad news about their lives that ends up with good news in the end. It's a lot like the gospel. The other part of it, why would he stick with the people who is like this? Is there anyone else in the world that won't do this? One of the things that you see in the Bible when you read these stories is that God doesn't have any other people he can choose. No matter who he chooses, everyone's a sinner. No matter who he looks at and says, you're going to be my servant, everyone is unfaithful. There are no heroes in the Bible. And so when God picks these people and walks with them and is faithful to them, he's doing that because there is no one else. And he's always been faithful, more faithful than we are, and faithful to sinners. Also, when you read that song of Moses there in the end of Deuteronomy, it's not a happy song. It's not a positive song in any way. And so why is God giving them this song? Well, it's something that they're going to memorize that's going to remind them how bad they are, how unfaithful they are, and how God is the only God, and he is with them forever. And I think if you read the Song of Moses and you connect it to the book of Isaiah, you actually see an awful lot of parallels. And I wonder if Isaiah was meditating on this when he was writing down things like, I am the Lord and there is no other, I am God and there is no one like me. Because those are things that are very much echoed in the Song of Moses. And so I think that God gave that to them as a guide for how to deal with their evil and how to trust in God in the middle of their wickedness, and how to give righteous people within the culture hope as they were in an evil culture. So I hope that helps. Number 2, who wrote the last part of Deuteronomy about the death of Moses? When I was young, I learned that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. And so I got to the end of Deuteronomy and I thought, that's really cool. Moses wrote about his own death. Man, it's neat how he knew that. And then later on, I thought, maybe not. So this is, again, a throwback to Dr. Kilpatrick. I hope you guys love him by now. He said that the difference in the Hebrew in Deuteronomy, from the beginning of Deuteronomy to that very ending part, is pretty stark. So the books of Moses use Hebrew in all of its glory. They are extremely complex and just beautiful. They're poetic. And the very end of Deuteronomy, where it talks about the death and burial of Moses, departs from that style. It actually uses the most simple kind of Hebrew available, almost totally in, it's a tense called kal. And that is very similar to the book of Joshua. And so it's very likely that Joshua wrote the end of Deuteronomy. So hope that helps. Number 3, is God wicked in ordering the deaths of everyone in the land of Canaan? Because this is what they're going to go and do. Israel's going to march out of the desert into the land of Canaan and kill everyone. So is God wicked? Because this is going to be everyone, every person and every tribe in every city. So is God wicked? And I think we find that answer in the story of Rahab. When you have a woman who is in the middle of one of these tribes, in the middle of a city that's actually doomed to death, according to God's decree, everyone in Jericho should die. That includes Rahab. But what you also see right there is everyone hears the story of God. They know what's happened. They know who God is. Rahab, out of all of them, comes to the conclusion that he is the God of heaven and earth, and she wants to follow and worship him. And so she's saved with her family with her. Later on, you also see the story of this other tribe that's inhabiting the land. And they send an envoy to Joshua. And they say, oh, we've traveled so far. We need you to make a treaty with us to take care of us when the nations come. And they take a look at their clothes, their shoes, their bread. And they think, man, these guys traveled really far. And so they said, we will make a treaty with you. And that whole tribe ended up being saved from death because they heard the story of God. And they made a treaty with Joshua. Now, Joshua was not consulting God at that time, but you also see where these people heard and believed, acted on their faith, and were saved along with their whole tribe. And so salvation was actually open and available to anyone in the whole land who would have heard God's story and responded with faith. It's just that you see only these two groups of people actually responded that way, and that tells you a lot about who we are as people. Number 4. Joshua 5. Who is the commander of the army of the Lord? We've seen this a couple of different times when the angel of the Lord appears to someone, and you see there's a distinct difference between angels and the angel of God. Angels never accept worship. Angels don't portray themselves as God in any way. They very much portray themselves as messengers. And when we see other places where the angel of the Lord appears, and here where the commander of the army of the Lord appears, this commander of the army of the Lord actually tells Joshua, take your shoes off in front of me, which is what God had done when he appeared to Moses in the burning bush. And so he's actually demanding respect, he's demanding honor, and he's demanding worship. Well, who could that be but God himself? So the most likely person that this is a pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, because Jesus later says, nobody has seen the Father, he has seen me, has seen the Father. And we see many places where he shows up in the Old Testament, just not incarnated. And so I believe that the commander of the armies of the Lord right there is the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. Another from Dr. Kilpatrick. This is the Sar Savai Elohim, and he's the commander of the armies of the Lord. When Jesus is born in Bethlehem, and the angel comes and appears to the shepherd, who appears with the angel in the heavenly places? A host, a heavenly host. But that word host is not well translated for our modern English. It's actually a heavenly army. And so when Jesus is born, the commander of the army is born into this world. The army shows up to celebrate. So that's free. That's just kind of a cool thing. Number 5, the punishment of Acan. Why the whole family? Why does this whole family die? For us, as very individualistic Westerners, that sounds like really harsh and mean. So why does Acan's whole family die? Because he goes and he steals some stuff, and then he's done something, but everyone dies for it. Okay, so I think we need to consider this. How many people died because of what Acan did? 36 different men. So 36 families lost people out of their family. But what you also see here is, where did Acan hide this stuff that he found? In the middle of his tent. He dug a hole and he hid it underneath the middle of his tent. Well, who lives in the tent? His whole family. Who is complicit in this crime to hide this stuff? His whole family. So his whole family conspired to bring about the deaths of these 36 men and this defeat of Israel. And so when his whole family pays this price, that's actually a just price to pay. But I also think that we see something in the Bible that's represented over and over, and that's the idea of your federal head. All of humanity sinned in Adam, the federal head. We all sin in Adam. We all die in Adam. Acan was the federal head of his family in this case. And what the beautiful thing that points to the gospel in this is that Jesus is our federal head. And when we come to him in faith, he's the one that stands in front of God, and everything that he did is something that we're also responsible for, or he is responsible for us. And so everything that he did is something we get the credit for. And so you see just where here sin impacted a whole family, and a whole family got the credit for one sin, you also see in a much greater, more beautiful way how righteousness impacts a whole family, and a whole family of Christians gets the credit for the righteousness of Jesus Christ. So is God unrighteous? No, in fact, he's more righteous than we could ever believe. We have to bring the gospel back and remember the gospel every time we're reading the Old Testament. In also Joshua 9, did the sun really stand still in Joshua 9? Yes. Yes, I had a professor a while ago that said that there was no way that the Bible was accurate because it talked about the sun moving instead of the earth, and the Bible has no sense of science, and so we couldn't trust any of this. And if it talked about the sun standing still, well, that was this big miracle, and it wasn't scientific in any way, and so we can't trust the Bible. It's not a science book. The sun stood still. That's what the Bible says. That's what happened. And when the Bible talks about the sun moving in the sky, is that any different from when we say that the sun rises or the sun sets? We should be talking about the earth turned until the sun came into view, or the earth turned until the sun went out of view. But we don't do that. Why? Because that's what we see. We see the sun rising and the sun setting. So it doesn't mean that we don't know science. It doesn't mean that the rest of what we say is not true. And so we can't use that argument with the Bible either. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky. It was the first time that we see that the Bible describes that it never happened anything like this before, that God obeyed a man. But we see how God was so disposed in his goodwill toward his people for them to be able to win that battle that he stopped the sun in the sky for them. That's how much he loved them. So I hope this helps you. I hope these have been some useful, hard questions to answer. And I really look forward to next week. Thank you.